Welcome back. Last week, Matama Vet's Andrea Ritmeester spoke to Kiwi Bred about the scoping of yearlings at sale. This week, we take things a little further and learn about the use of a dynamic endoscopic examination of a racehorse. So Andrea, when we're talking about dynamic scoping, how did the dynamic scope evolve and what are the advantages of using it?
The dynamic scope evolved because of the limitations of the resting scope, which basically doesn't allow us to pick up conditions that are dynamic in nature, that only happen when the horse is actually working. So we try to get around it in different ways. What we were doing before the development of the overground endoscope is we were actually putting these horses on treadmills, and we were just using a video scope like we used at rest, but have the horse galloping along beside us on a treadmill, so we would, get an image of that throat as the horse is working. The downside of that was obviously in a thoroughbred is you can't put a jockey on their back when they're on the treadmill, so it's not safe. So we weren't mimicking true racing conditions with the treadmill. And particularly in the thoroughbred, the weight of the jockey and the pulling of the jockey on the reins and the position of the head are quite instrumental in causing the noise and creating the problems that we see. So the treadmill was good, but again still had its limitations. The overground endoscope was developed to try and get around that and basically give us an opportunity to really mimic the conditions that the horse has when it's got a rider on its back and it's racing, going at full racing speed. So the dynamic scope is a flexible scope which is attached to the horse's bridle and fed up the nostril, and it's recorded on a computer which is carried in the saddle blanket of the horse. So it's a very small unit, it's quite light, the horse doesn't mind wearing it, they can run at racing speeds with a rider on their backs while carrying it. And so what it does is we'll put it on, we'll make sure the position is correct, and then we'll send that horse out on the track and we'll get it to do the work that it needs to do to make the noise, which is what the trainer is worried about. And then what the image of that horse's throat and what it's doing is being recorded on a computer.
So from these images here, Andrea, what are we seeing?
We can actually look at the horse's throat in real time and what it's doing as the horse is galloping and breathing as it's running. So it does take a bit of getting used to because the images move very quickly. But what you can see when you train your eye and look at it long enough is that you can see whether the soft tissues are collapsing, whether one side or the other of the throat is getting pulled in, whether the soft palate is displacing. There are a whole lot of conditions that you can look at, which structures are actually collapsing inwards when the horse is doing the work that it's doing.
What grade is the horse we're seeing here?
This horse is a grade 4, so it has some movement, but as it's running and the cartilage gets more and more tired, or the horse gets more and more tired, the muscle holding the cartilage out is getting more and more tired, and then over time, as the horse runs faster and faster, that left side is completely collapsing inwards, and where it's actually getting sucked across the airway and completely occluding it, and so that horse is making a lot of noise.
An example like that, the horse would need surgery?
Absolutely. I mean, that horse is not going to race looking like that. So what we have found is that even horses with paralysed throats can generally run for over very short distances because a horse can actually run about 1,000 metres without having to breathe at all. What we get with when these horses are quite young and they haven't had an opportunity to prove themselves, we encourage people to maybe break them in and get them to the trials and maybe run them over an 800-metre trial just to get a feel for whether they have any ability or not, because obviously taking them to surgery is quite a big step. So if they show enough ability and the people are happy, then the next step would be to do surgery on them and tie that cartilage back, give that horse a better airway for being competitive.
With the dynamic scope, what advancements do you see being made in the future to perhaps improve the way you do things?
I think we've already made huge advancements since we've had it. There was a lot of conditions that we didn't even really know about or appreciate, because we could only scope them at rest before. Basically a horse made a noise, we got them scoped, they looked okay at rest, so we were only guessing as to what was actually the problem. And the more we do dynamic scopes on these horses, both before and after surgery, the more we're learning about how the throat works. And it's such a complex structure, there are so many soft tissue components that it's very interesting to see how they all interrelate to one another, and you have failure of one thing and it's like a snowball effect, and you end up with other problems as well. So we've learned a tremendous amount since we've had the dynamic scope, and I think we'll continue to do so.
Next week, we take a look at the surgical treatment for a horse with laryngeal hemiplegia. It's now time for Kiwi Bred Abroad, and we're in Singapore with New Zealand bloodstock's Mike Kneebone.
Hi and welcome to another edition of Kiwi Bred Abroad. It's a show brought to you the compliments of the Singapore Turf Club, who race from their Kranji base every Friday and Sunday. For this show we're in Sabah. It's in the eastern states of Malaysia, and we're following 60 Kiwi bred horses purchased by the Royal Sabah Turf Club. Trackside's Alisha Neilson catches up with New Zealand bloodstock's Danny Ralston and Greg Northcott to go through the logistics and the purchasing of the Kiwi thoroughbreds.
So Danny, how did the contract to send horses to Sabah come about?
As you're aware, New Zealand Bloodstock has a full-time office in Asia, based in Singapore, which covers all our Asian clientele and emerging markets. And Mike Kneebone managed to secure the contract with his connections from his time spent up there.
I guess what are the advantages to our New Zealand breeders in moving horses to that part of the world?
Anywhere we can get winners with the New Zealand suffix behind their name is advantageous to New Zealand bloodstock and the New Zealand breeding industry as a whole. So to get those horses up there is ever so important.
Total of 59 horses went up there. Where have you had to go to find them?
We've been the length and breadth of the country. Actually, we purchased some through the mixed bloodstock sale here at Karaka in August, and we also purchased horses through the South Island mixed sale of 2-year-olds, and the remainder were private from all over the South and North Island.
Greg, for people who don't know, Sabah is the northeast corner of Malaysia, or what was Borneo. How difficult was it logistically to move horses to that part of the world?
It was quite difficult, but anywhere in the world that you move horses to for the first time is always a challenge. There was no health certification available at the time, so we had to deal through both governments to get the health protocol up and running. Then of course, this large number of horses going to a country who are not used to receiving horses, let alone this sort of number, is always quite a challenge, and it's something we certainly look forward to and enjoy.
What sort of organisation went into setting up the quarantine facilities at the export destination?
Well, luckily enough, the quarantine facility was, the boxes were already there. We just had to organise fences around it just to keep the local population away from the horses arriving. But the biggest challenge probably was getting the horses to the quarantine. They had no horse floats, so we had to sort of start thinking outside the square of getting the horses from the airport to the quarantine station, and luckily it all went very well.
Sabah is a state of eastern Malaysia next door to the Kingdom of Brunei. The capital city is Kota Kinabalu and is better known for its ecotourism. Mount Kinabalu is the highest peak in Southeast Asia. The Royal Sabah Turf Club has been racing local ponies and even ox for over 100 years. The groundbreaking move into thoroughbreds is the brainchild of Royal Sabah Turf Club chairman Mr. Peter Tet Chin Fong. Peter, the Royal Sabah Turf Club have got a long history. How many members have you got at present?
We have 380 live and full members.
The club's been racing ponies for nearly 100 years, Peter. What led you to the decision to actually introduce thoroughbreds?
Well, there's the only way to promote the thoroughbred and the racing industry in the RSTC.
You've got a lot of choices to buy horses from different places, and you have actually been bringing them in from Malaysia and Singapore for a few years now. What led to your decision to actually buy the horses from New Zealand?
Well, I think New Zealand is the best choice. There's a value of money.
And Peter, the idea for the club is to sell them at auction, and Are you happy with the number of buyers that you have here today?
Oh yes,
Do you think that the horses will sell well?
I hope so.
Are you going to buy any?
Yes, I will, personally.
James Leong, you've been a racing commentator here in Sabah since the early 70s. You must have seen a lot of changes.
Oh yes, we have a lot of changes that what we had for the past years. I've been racing commentator in Sabah, the Royal Sabah Turf Club, ever since in 1970, for around about 30 years. And initially we were having a pony race, but we have had introduced thoroughbred in the early days, but it was not successful. And now we came in with the new committees, and we are going to introduce thoroughbred race. And today we are going to auction 58 thoroughbreds from New Zealand, and that will be a wonderful day for us in Tambalang Racecourse, and that will be a history that Tambalang Racecourse will come in the future.
Well, there you have it, a very forward-thinking chairman of the Royal Sabah Turf Club, and a lot happening up here in eastern Malaysia. Next week we're going to follow the auction of the horses here in Sabah. Until then, we'll catch you next time.